Fletcher Donovan rubbed his tired eyes when the clock on the wall of the auto repair shop showed 5 o'clock in the evening. One more hour, and he could go home to Marlowe. The grease on his hands had become ingrained in the calluses that had formed over 12 years of working as a mechanic, becoming an integral part of his palms, a kind of professional calling card. Bridgeport, Ohio, wasn't a place of great opportunity, but it paid the bills, and Fletcher liked what he did. "Fletch, can you take a look at this Ford?" called Dave Rivers, owner of Rivers Auto Service, the only decent auto repair shop in all of central Bridgeport. The customer says he still hears that strange knocking noise when he turns right. Fletcher nodded and wiped his hands on a rag that had once been blue but was now covered in black stains. "Give me half an hour," he said. "I just finished the Patterson sedan. Had to replace the radiator hose, but the car's ready." Dave was a good boss, demanding but fair. At 55, he'd been running the shop for almost 30 years and knew every part of an engine like the back of his hand. Fletcher had learned a lot from him. As Fletcher washed his hands in the small sink in the corner of the workshop, his thoughts returned to Marlowe. 10 years of marriage should have made their relationship easier, but lately it was as if a wall had grown between them. He couldn't say exactly when it had started to change. Maybe 2 years ago, when Marlowe started working for an insurance company in the larger town of Wheeling. Or 6 months ago, when their latest attempt to have a baby ended in failure. Their life together had become routine: dinner in front of the TV, the occasional trip to the movies on Fridays, casual sex on weekends. The Ford Fletcher had been working on for the last half hour did indeed have a problem. A faulty CV joint needed replacing. He wrote the diagnosis on the order form and returned to his locker to get his phone. A message from Marlowe was flashing on the screen. "I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up for dinner." Fletcher frowned. The third time this week. He quickly typed, "Everything okay? Want me to pick you up after work?" The reply came almost instantly. "No, don't bother. Lots of paperwork. I'll be late." He sent a short "okay" and put his phone away. Something about this brief exchange made him feel uneasy, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. "Everything okay?" Dave asked, noticing the look on his face. "Yeah, just Marlowe's running late at work," Fletcher replied, trying to sound casual. Dave nodded understandingly. His own marriage had fallen apart 15 years ago, and he had been living alone ever since, occasionally dating divorced women around his age. "You know, sometimes I envy you," Dave said, drying his hands. "You have someone waiting for you at home. I come back to an empty apartment every night." Fletcher forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm lucky." By 6:30, Fletcher had finished all his work for the day and headed for his 2000 Jeep Cherokee. The car was long overdue for a paint job, but the engine ran flawlessly. Fletcher made sure of that himself. On the way home, he stopped at Kroger Supermarket and bought a frozen pizza and a six-pack of beer. If he was going to eat dinner alone, he might as well be comfortable. Their home, a modest one-story, three-bedroom cottage on a quiet street, greeted him with emptiness and silence. They had bought it 5 years ago with a 20-year mortgage, nothing fancy, but it was theirs, with a small backyard with a barbecue and a garage where Fletcher sometimes worked on his neighbor's car or fixed the lawnmower. It was a typical middle-class home in Bridgeport, where real estate prices were more affordable than in neighboring towns. Fletcher heated up a pizza, opened a beer, and turned on the TV. A baseball game was on. The Cleveland Guardians were playing the Chicago White Sox. He tried to focus on the game, but his thoughts kept returning to Marlowe. Lately, she had become distant, often staring at her phone, laughing at messages she didn't show him. When he asked who she was texting, Marlowe would respond vaguely, "Just colleagues," or "girls from work." They used to have no secrets between them, but something had changed, and Fletcher couldn't figure out what it was. After finishing his third can of beer, he decided to take a shower. Under the hot water, the tension of the day eased a little. Stepping out of the bathroom, Fletcher heard the front door open. "Hi, I'm home." Marlowe's voice sounded a little louder than usual, as if she wanted to make sure he heard her.
"I'm in the bedroom," Fletcher replied, quickly pulling on his shorts and t-shirt. Marlowe appeared in the doorway. 34 years old, shoulder-length brown hair, light makeup, which she always wore for work. She was a beautiful woman, although the last few years had added a few wrinkles around her eyes. She was wearing a strict office suit, which, Fletcher now noticed, emphasized her figure more than the one she used to wear. "How was your day?" he asked, trying to catch her eye. "Tiring," Marlowe replied, avoiding his gaze. "The new client is very demanding." "We had to redo the documents several times." She walked past him to the closet and began to take off her work clothes. Fletcher noticed a faint scent of perfume, not the one he had given her last Christmas. "I heated up some pizza if you're hungry," he offered. "Thanks, but I had a snack at the office," Marlowe said, pulling out a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt. "I'm going to take a shower. It's been a long day." As she headed for the bathroom, her phone, left on the nightstand, rang. Fletcher wasn't going to look. He really didn't. But something, intuition or just accumulated suspicion, made him glance at the screen. The message was from a contact saved as Lisa Office, but the content made Fletcher's heart skip a beat. "Today was great. Can't wait to see you again. Delete this message." Fletcher stared at the screen, feeling the blood drain from his face. The phone buzzed again and the message disappeared, obviously set to auto-delete. A second message also came from Lisa. "You didn't say anything about those photos?" The sound of the running shower drowned out his racing heartbeat. He stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to make sense of what he had seen. Maybe it was some kind of joke. Maybe he had misunderstood. But deep down, he knew. All the late nights, the new clothes, the secrecy with his phone. The picture slowly came together in his mind, and he felt nauseous. Fletcher carefully put the phone back exactly where it had been. When Marlowe came back from the bathroom, he was sitting on the bed, pretending to look at his own phone. "What are your plans for the weekend?" he asked, trying to keep his voice sounding normal. Marlowe shrugged, drying her hair with a towel. "I don't know yet. Maybe we could visit my parents on Sunday. We haven't seen them in a while." Fletcher nodded, trying not to betray the storm of emotions raging inside him. "Sure, sounds good." They went to bed as usual, on opposite sides of the bed, not touching. Marlowe fell asleep almost immediately, while Fletcher lay awake, staring at the ceiling and replaying the message over and over in his head. Who was this person hiding behind the name Lisa Office? How long had this been going on? And what should he do now? He knew one thing for sure. He needed proof, something more substantial than a message he had glimpsed, which could be explained away in many ways. And for that, he needed a plan. With that thought, Fletcher finally fell asleep, while outside the window, the sky over Bridgeport began to lighten, heralding the start of a new day that would never be the same again. By the end of the following week, Fletcher could hardly concentrate on his work. The thought of Marlowe's possible betrayal occupied every free corner of his mind, turning ordinary work tasks into automatic actions. The tools he had mastered a week ago now felt heavy and clumsy in his hands. "Hey, Fletcher, did you fall off the moon?" Dave pointed to the drain plug that Fletcher had just dropped into the oil pan. "That's the third time today. What's going on with you?" Fletcher rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. "I just didn't get enough sleep. Sorry." Dave looked at him doubtfully. "Listen, if you need a day off—" "No," Fletcher replied quickly. "I'm fine. Really." But he wasn't fine. Every time he picked up his phone, he fought the urge to check Marlowe's messages to find out who this Lisa Office was. But one message he happened to read wasn't proof. He needed something more substantial, and a plan began to form in Fletcher's mind.
During his lunch break, sitting alone in his Jeep in the parking lot behind the auto repair shop, Fletcher opened the search engine on his phone. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a few seconds before he typed, "Sites for married people who cheat." The search engine returned numerous results, and among them, a few names appeared more frequently than others. Ashley Madison, Victoria's Secret, Hitched Affairs. Fletcher felt nausea rising in his throat. There were entire universes created specifically for people who wanted to cheat on their partners. How many stories like his own were unfolding right now around the world? He chose one of the sites, Hidden Affairs, and clicked on the link. The bright interface promising discreet encounters for busy people filled him with a mixture of disgust and determination. Fletcher took a deep breath and clicked on the registration button. It took about 20 minutes to create a profile. Instead of his real name, he chose Tobias Lynch, a name he had always liked in an old detective novel. He listed his real age, 36, but changed his location slightly to the neighboring town of Wheeling, where Marlowe worked. Under occupation, he wrote financial consultant, the complete opposite of his real job. Fletcher spent the longest time thinking about the photo. Using his real photo was too risky. Marlowe could recognize him. In the end, he chose a photo of a man from a stock image website. Attractive enough, but not model-like, with dark hair and brown eyes, somewhat similar to himself, but not too much. In the About Me section, Fletcher wrote, "Successful professional looking for new experiences with no strings attached. Married, I value discretion and mutual respect. An intellectual connection is as important as a physical one." When the profile was ready, Fletcher paid for a month's subscription with a prepaid card he had bought specifically for this purpose. Now, all he had to do was wait and search. 3 days passed without incident. Fletcher browsed women's profiles and sent messages, but received few responses. Most of them were automated or from accounts that were clearly run by bots. He didn't find a single profile that could belong to Marlowe. On the 4th day, he changed his tactics. Instead of actively searching, Fletcher decided to wait for someone to show interest in his profile. He updated his photo, adding a few random pictures, supposedly from his professional life. Photos of his office, his suit, an expensive watch, all taken from the internet. That same evening, he received a message. "Hi, Tobias. Interesting profile. What brought you here?" The sender used the nickname Sybil. Her profile was modest, a few vague photos showing only part of her face or her figure from behind. Age, 34. Location, Wheeling. Status, married, looking for fun. Fletcher's heart began to beat faster. Could it be Marlowe? He studied the photos carefully, but they were too vague to tell for sure. He had to proceed with caution. "Hi, Sybil. I guess the same as most people here, looking for something missing in my life. How about you?" The reply came almost immediately, indicating that the woman was online. "Honest answer. I appreciate that. I'm here because my marriage has become stale. 10 years together and we've stopped seeing each other. Sound familiar?" Fletcher felt his stomach tighten. 10 years of marriage, just like him and Marlowe. Coincidence? He had to find out more. Very familiar. Routine kills passion. The strange thing is, I love my wife, but something got lost along the way. I understand. My husband is a good man, hard-working, reliable, but boring, always the same. Work, home, TV, sleep. Sometimes I feel invisible. Fletcher exhaled slowly. The description was painfully accurate. Was this how Marlowe saw their life, their relationship, him? "What are you missing?" he typed. There was a pause before the reply came. "Excitement, risk, feeling alive. My husband is a creature of habit. He never does anything spontaneous. Everything has to be planned, predictable. I'm suffocating in this predictability." Each word was like a punch in the gut. Fletcher had always believed that stability was what people valued in a relationship. He worked, provided for them, kept the house in order. Wasn't that enough?
And what are you looking for here? Just a fling or something more? I'm not looking for a new husband, if that's what you mean, Sybil replied. But I'm not just looking for a one-night stand either. More like a connection with someone who will see me for who I really am. Someone I can share the parts of myself that I have to hide in everyday life. Fletcher stared at those words for a long time. If this was really Marlo, then she wasn't just looking for a casual physical relationship. She was looking for the emotional intimacy that she felt had disappeared from their marriage. "Do you believe in fidelity?" he asked, holding his breath. This time the pause was longer. "I did. I really did. When I got married, I was sure I would never even look at another man. But as the years go by, you begin to realize that life is more complicated than it seemed when you were 24. 24 was exactly how old Marlo was when they got married. And your husband, did he ever suspect anything?" "No. He's too busy with his work and his problems to notice the changes in me. Sometimes I think I could dance naked in front of him and he'd just ask if I'd seen the TV remote." Fletcher gripped the phone so tightly that he was afraid he might break it. This woman, whether she was his wife or not, was expressing thoughts that completely overturned his view of his marriage. "Have you ever been with anyone else before this site?" Another pause. "Yes, twice. The first time was 3 years ago. A colleague from work. Nothing serious, just a few dates. The second was a year ago. We met on a business trip. I think it's easier to be with someone who's not in your usual circle." 3 years ago was around the time Fletcher first noticed changes in Marlo's behavior. And a year ago, she did go to an insurance conference in Pittsburgh for 3 days. "How do you live with that? Don't you feel guilty?" "Of course I do, especially at first. But then you realize that everyone has their own life. My husband gets what he needs, a stable home, dinner on the table, occasional sex on the weekends. I get what I don't have elsewhere. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's life." Fletcher didn't know how to respond. His hands were shaking. If this really was Marlo, she had just confessed to 2 instances of infidelity that he hadn't even suspected. "What about you, Tobias? Have you ever cheated?" Fletcher thought about it. If he wanted to continue this conversation, he had to keep up the charade. "Yes, once. I didn't plan it, it just happened. But now I'm here more. Consciously. Honest. I like that. Most men here either tell Casanova stories or pretend to be innocent lambs. What do you do, Tobias, besides looking for attention on the side?" Fletcher remembered his cover story. "Financial consultant. I work with numbers a lot, analyze markets. Not the most exciting job, but it pays the bills. What about you?" "I work for an insurance company. Numbers too, but more boring." Marlo. It had to be her. "Sounds interesting. Maybe we should get to know each other better? Maybe over coffee or dinner?" "Not so fast, Tobias. I'm cautious. First, I want to see if we're compatible. What are you looking for in a relationship?" Fletcher took a deep breath. He needed to give an answer that would move the conversation forward. "Honestly, connection. Not just physical, although that's important. I want to feel that someone sees me, not the role I play every day, but the real me. I want excitement, yes, but I also want intimacy, the opportunity to be honest with someone without fear of being judged." "I like your answer. That's exactly what I'm looking for. You know what? Let's continue this conversation tomorrow. It's late, and I have to get up early for work." "Sure. It was nice meeting you, Sybil." "Likewise, Tobias. Good night." The chat fell silent, and Fletcher leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling from the information he had just received. He had almost no doubt that Sybil was Marlo. Too many coincidences, too many precise details. The next morning, Fletcher watched Marlo as she got ready for work. She looked like her usual self, hurriedly drinking her coffee,
checking her bag, looking for her car keys. Nothing in her behavior betrayed the woman who had confided in a stranger about her infidelities the night before. "Do you have a lot of work today?" Fletcher asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Same as usual," Marlowe replied without looking up. "A few client meetings, reports, nothing special. Maybe we could go out for dinner tonight. It's been a while." Marlowe finally looked at him, a flash of surprise in her eyes. "Tonight? I'm not sure I'll be free." "No problem," Fletcher shrugged. "Just thought it might be nice." Marlowe walked over to him and kissed him lightly on the cheek, a formal gesture that had long been part of their morning ritual. "I'll call you if I can get out early." When the door closed behind her, Fletcher sank heavily into a chair. The plan was in motion, but every new piece of information caused him pain. Tonight, he would log into the chat room as Tobias once again, and perhaps he would find even more proof that his marriage had long since existed only on paper. But deep down, Fletcher felt a strange mixture of emotions. Anger and pain, certainly, but also a certain excitement from this game of cat and mouse. Marlowe had no idea she was talking to her own husband, and this secret power of knowledge gave him an advantage he had never had before in their relationship. For the next 2 weeks, Fletcher led a double life. During the day, he was a mechanic, a husband who came home after a long day at work, watched TV, and tried to maintain the appearance of a normal relationship with Marlowe. But every evening, when she went to her early shift, as she called it, Fletcher transformed into Tobias Lynch, a successful financial advisor seeking thrills on the side. His conversations with Sybil grew deeper and more intimate. What started out as superficial chatter about work and hobbies turned into candid discussions about life, marriage, and unfulfilled desires. "When did you realize you wanted more than your marriage could offer?" Tobias asked one evening. "It happened gradually. At first, you convince yourself that this is how it's supposed to be. That passion inevitably fades and all that's left is a comfortable routine. But about 3 years ago, I had a particularly difficult day at work. I came home upset, just wanting to be heard. My husband didn't even look up from the TV. He just said, 'Uh-huh, that's too bad,' and kept watching his show. At that moment, I realized I had become part of the furniture, invisible." Fletcher remembered that day. Marlowe had indeed come home upset, but he was sure he had listened to her carefully, hadn't he? He tried to remember the details, but they eluded him. Maybe he really had dismissed her problems, thinking his were more important? "And what happened next?" he asked. "The next week, I had a meeting with a client. He was attentive, listened to me, asked questions. I felt seen, like a woman, not just a function. We started seeing each other after work. At first, it was just to discuss business. Then it became something more." Fletcher felt his insides tighten. He remembered that period. Marlowe often stayed late at work talking about some important client, but never going into details. And her husband never suspected anything. "No, he's too wrapped up in his own life. I could have easily led a whole second life, and he wouldn't have noticed a thing as long as I kept cooking dinner and doing his laundry." Those words hurt more than a physical blow. Had he really been that blind, that inattentive? "And now, are you still seeing anyone outside the site?" There was a pause. "No. My last affair ended a few months ago. He became too attached, wanted something more, and I'm not ready to destroy my marriage, despite all its flaws." Fletcher made a mental note. If Sybil was really Marlowe, then there was another relationship he didn't know about, and it had ended very recently. With each conversation, Fletcher gained new pieces of the puzzle that was his marriage. Sybil told stories that matched their life together too closely to be mere coincidence. Details about boring family dinners at her parents' house. They think he's the perfect son-in-law because he fixes their car for free. About mutual friends. We only see his school friends. He finds mine too loud. about her unfulfilled dream of having children. After the third failed attempt, we just stopped talking about it. On the 10th day of their correspondence, Sybil suggested they exchange photos. Not faces, of course, but I'd like to see a little more of who I'm talking to. Fletcher froze. This was the decisive moment. If he sent his real photo, his cover could be blown, but refusing could sever the developing connection. "What exactly would you like to see?" he asked cautiously. "Oh, I'm not talking about anything too revealing. Maybe just a shirtless photo? I'll send you something similar." Fletcher quickly considered his options. He could find a suitable photo online, but that was risky. Marlowe could discover the deception through an image search. Instead, he decided to use an old photo taken 3 years ago during their vacation at Lake Erie. In it, he had a beard, which he had since shaved off, and looked different enough from his tan and the angle of the shot to not be immediately recognizable. Cropping the photo so that his face wasn't visible, Fletcher sent it to Sybil. "Impressive," she replied after a short pause. "Now it's my turn." A few seconds later, the photo appeared in the chat. Fletcher's heart skipped a beat. The photo showed a female figure in black lace lingerie. Her face was not visible, but her body. He would have recognized that body anywhere. The slim waist, the rounded hips, and most importantly, the mole on the inside of her right thigh. It was exactly the same as Marlowe's. "Do you like it?" Sybil asked. Fletcher couldn't find the words. Before him was proof that Sybil was his wife. A photo he had definitely never seen before. Lingerie he had never bought. A pose she had never struck in front of him. "Very," he finally replied, trying to control the storm of emotions. "You're stunning. I have a few more like this that I can show you later, but only if you behave yourself." This playfulness, this flirtation, everything that had been missing from their own relationship in recent years. Marlowe hadn't spoken to him like that in a long time. She hadn't tried to seduce or surprise him. "I'll be waiting," Fletcher replied, though inside he was seething with a mixture of anger, jealousy, and a strange, twisted interest in continuing this game. In real life, nothing had changed. Marlowe came home, made dinner, and they talked about everyday things: bills, weekend plans, news from Bridgeport. But now Fletcher saw every moment in a new light. Every "I'll be late" turned into a potential lie. Every time she looked at her phone and smiled, he thought, who is she texting? A new lover? Or maybe Tobias? At times, Fletcher found himself becoming jealous of his alter ego. Marlowe was honest with Tobias, sharing her fears and desires with him. Why not with him, her husband? "How long have you been on this site?" he asked Sybil during one of their nighttime conversations. "This is my first time, actually. A friend recommended it. She said she met an interesting man here." "How's the experience been?" "Better than I expected. Most of the men here are too straightforward. They want to jump right into sex. You're different. You're really interested in who I am." Fletcher felt a bitter irony. Of course he was interested. He was trying to understand what was going on in his own wife's head. "Have you ever thought about just talking to your husband, telling him what you're missing?" The long pause made him worry that he had gone too far. "I've tried. Many times. At the beginning of our marriage, I told him I needed more attention, more spontaneity. He agreed, promised to change. Things would get better for a week or two, and then everything would go back to the way it was. At some point, I just got tired of explaining the obvious." Fletcher tensed, trying to remember those conversations. Had they happened? Had Marlowe really tried to tell him she was unhappy and he hadn't listened? "And you decided that cheating was the best way out." "Not cheating. It was an addition. I'm not going to leave my husband. He's a good man, reliable. But there's no passion, no fire, and I need that. Don't you know that feeling? Does your wife give you everything you need?" Fletcher thought about it. If he really were Tobias, how would he respond? "No, she doesn't. We've been together for 10 years, And every year I feel like we're growing further apart. It's like we're living parallel lives in the same house. Exactly. That's how I feel. We're like roommates with a history. Sometimes we have sex, but more often than not, we just exist side by side. This description painfully accurately reflected their current relationship. Fletcher realized with embarrassment that he couldn't remember the last time they had really talked to each other, rather than just exchanging information about everyday matters. But what if your husband finds out? Aren't you afraid of losing what you have? Of course I am. That's why I'm so careful. But sometimes the risk is worth it to feel alive. You know, the last time I had an affair, I felt like I woke up from a long sleep. The colors became brighter, the music more beautiful. I started paying attention to my appearance again, buying nice lingerie. Not for my husband. He wouldn't have noticed anyway, but for myself. And for him, of course. Fletcher remembered how, a few months ago, Marlowe had indeed started taking better care of herself. New hairstyle, new clothes. He decided it was just her way of dealing with a midlife crisis and didn't think much of it. How blind he had been. Have you ever thought about just leaving? Getting a divorce? Sometimes, on particularly bad days. But then I think about our house, our mutual friends, the life we've built, the financial stability, and I realize I'm not ready to lose it all. Maybe it's selfish of me to want both the security of marriage and the excitement of affairs on the side, but aren't we all selfish deep down? Fletcher wanted to scream, to drop this charade and just ask Marlowe straight out how she could do this, but he held back. He needed all the details, all the evidence before he made his move. "Can I ask you something personal?" he typed. "Of course. We're well past formalities, aren't we? The last man you had an affair with, who was he?" The pause was long and Fletcher almost feared he had gone too far. "A colleague. Married. 2 children. We worked on a project together and spent a lot of time together. It happened naturally." Fletcher remembered Marlowe mentioning a new colleague about 6 months ago. I think his name was Greg or Greg. She always spoke of him with slight irritation, complaining about his work methods. Was that a mask? A way to hide her true feelings? And how long did it last? About 3 months. Then his wife got suspicious and we decided to stop. He didn't want to risk his marriage. Did you? No, it was just a fling. Fun, exciting, but nothing more. Fletcher felt his heart pounding. 3 more months of infidelity he knew nothing about. How many more secrets was Marlowe hiding? "If we met, what would you want?" he asked, knowing he was pushing the conversation to a dangerous point. "Just talk, for starters. See if there's any chemistry between us in real life. If there is, who knows? I'm not planning anything, just letting things happen naturally." "I like that idea. Maybe coffee next week? I can come to Wheeling." "Maybe. Give me some time to think about it. I'm really enjoying our conversations, Tobias. You understand me better than most people I've known for years." Those words caused Fletcher almost physical pain. His own wife felt more understood by a stranger on the internet than by the man she had lived with for 10 years. "I'm glad. I enjoy our conversations too. You're a smart, interesting woman. Your husband doesn't realize what he's missing." "Thank you. Sometimes I need to hear that." Their conversation ended shortly after that, and Fletcher leaned back in his chair, feeling a mixture of triumph and despair. He now had enough evidence. The photograph with the distinctive mole, stories that matched real events too closely, a description of their marriage that could only have come from Marlowe. Now he had to decide what to do next. Continue this game? See it through to its logical conclusion, to the supposed meeting where he would reveal his identity? Or stop now and simply show Marlowe the evidence of her infidelity? Lying in bed that night, listening to the steady breathing of his sleeping wife, Fletcher realized he had already made his decision. He would see this plan through to the end. He wanted not only to catch Marlowe, but to understand why. Why was she looking elsewhere for what he thought he was giving her at home? What had he missed? Where had he gone wrong? And perhaps more importantly, could their marriage be saved? Or were 10 years of living together doomed to turn to dust because of unspoken desires and broken hopes? Another week passed, and Fletcher finally arranged a meeting with Sybil. Through his alter ego Tobias, he suggested they meet at a small Starbucks in the Willing Shopping Center, a place crowded enough to feel comfortable but quiet enough to talk without prying ears. Sybil agreed almost immediately, suggesting Wednesday at 4 in the afternoon. "I'm going to have to stay late at work on Wednesday," Marlowe said at dinner, without looking up from her plate. "I have an important meeting with a client." Fletcher nodded, trying not to show his emotions. "Sure. Anything serious?" "No, just routine work," Marlowe shrugged. "But it might run late. Don't wait up for me." "Okay. Good luck with the client." That little lie was the last straw. Fletcher didn't need any more proof. Marlowe was definitely planning to meet with Tobias, the man she considered her potential lover. Now he had to carefully prepare for what would happen next. On Monday morning, Fletcher took the day off work, telling Dave he needed to take care of some personal business. Dave didn't ask any questions. Fletcher had rarely taken time off in all his years at the company and had earned his trust. Fletcher's first stop was a lawyer, a young woman named Lauren Patterson, who had recently opened a practice in Bridgeport. He had found her contact information through an acquaintance, making sure beforehand that Marlowe had no connection to this lawyer. "So, Mr. Donovan," Lauren said when they sat down in her small office, "how can I help you?" Fletcher took a deep breath. "I need some advice about a divorce." He spent the next hour explaining his situation, leaving out the details of how he found out about his wife's infidelity. Lauren listened attentively, taking notes. In Ohio, divorce is recognized as either mutual consent or fault, she explained when Fletcher finished. Given the circumstances, you can file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, which may affect the division of property in your favor, but you'll need proof. "I have it," Fletcher replied. "Screenshots of messages, photos, dates, everything." "Okay. We'll prepare the preliminary documents. The decision to file or not is up to you, but it's better to have everything ready." Together they discussed the details: division of property, the house they had purchased during their marriage, joint accounts. Fortunately, they had no children, which simplified the situation. Leaving the lawyer's office with a folder of prepared documents, Fletcher felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, he stopped being a passive victim and took control of the situation. The next step in his plan was financial separation. Fletcher went to the bank, where he opened a new personal account that Marlowe couldn't access. He transferred half of their joint savings, the amount that legally belonged to him. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start a new life if it came to that. Back home, Fletcher began gathering his most important belongings: documents, family photos, a few mementos. He didn't plan to move out immediately, but he wanted to be ready for any turn of events. He put everything in a sports bag and took it to the garage, hiding it behind some old boxes. On Tuesday, he could hardly concentrate at work. Dave asked him twice if everything was okay, and Fletcher brushed him off with vague references to lack of sleep and stress. Deep down, he admitted that part of him still hoped for some other explanation, that it would all turn out to be a terrible misunderstanding. That evening, he logged into the system as Tobias for the last time. "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow," he wrote to Sybil. "Me too. I'm a little nervous, but in a good way. How will I recognize you?" "I'll be wearing a red blouse and a black skirt. You, blue jacket, white shirt, and a smile when I see you." Marlowe sent a kiss emoji. Fletcher closed his laptop, feeling bitter. Tomorrow it would all be over, one way or another. Wednesday arrived. Fletcher left work early, telling Dave he had an important meeting to attend. In his car, he changed out of the blue jacket Tobias had promised him and into his usual clothes. Instead of going to the mall, he headed home. His intuition told him that Marlo would be getting ready for the meeting there. Sure enough, her car was in the driveway, even though she should have been at work at that time. Fletcher quietly entered through the back door. He could hear music and the sound of a hairdryer coming from the bedroom. He sat down in the living room, placed the divorce papers on the coffee table, and waited. 15 minutes later, Marlo came out of the bedroom. She was exactly as Sybil had described, wearing a red blouse, a black skirt, and more makeup than usual. She froze when she saw him. "Fletcher, what are you? I thought you were at work." "And I thought you were at work too," he replied calmly. "Don't you have an important meeting with a client?" "Yes, but I had to stop by home to change. The client is important." "At Starbucks in the mall? Do I need more details? Or would you prefer I call you Sybil?" The color drained from Marlo's face. She slowly sank to the edge of the sofa, as if her legs refused to hold her up. What are you talking about?" "Enough, Marlo." Fletcher's voice remained surprisingly calm. "I know everything. About your meeting with Tobias, about your past infidelities, about Greg, about everything you've been hiding from me all these years. How did I find out?" Fletcher took out his phone and opened the dating site app. "Because Tobias is me." He turned the screen toward Marlo, showing her Tobias's open profile and their messages. "It was you? All this time," she whispered, her face contorted with shock and horror. "You've been cheating on me?" Fletcher couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "I cheated on you? Seriously, Marlo? After everything you told Tobias about your escapades, you're accusing me of cheating?" Marlo covered her face with her hands. "I don't understand. Why did you do this? To catch me? Initially?" "Yes," Fletcher admitted. "I accidentally saw a message on your phone from Lisa's office. It was ambiguous enough to arouse suspicion, and I decided to check it out. You were spying on me? What else could I do? Ask you directly? Hey, honey, are you cheating on me?" Fletcher shook his head. "We both know you would have denied it." Marlo stood up and began pacing the room. "I can't believe it. All this time I thought I had finally found someone who understood me, and it was you playing with me. And that's all that bothers you? That your fling turned out to be a trap?" Fletcher felt anger rising inside him. "What about everything else? Greg? That guy from the business trip? How many were there really, Marlo?" She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. "Not as many as you think." "Oh, is that supposed to make me feel better? 3 affairs are better than 5 or 10. "You don't understand," she said, her voice pleading. "I felt so lonely, so invisible." "I heard that from Sybil," Fletcher said. "And you know what's worst? I never heard it from you. You never once told me straight out that you were unhappy. I tried." "When? When did you try, Marlo? Name one conversation where you clearly said, 'Fletcher, our marriage is falling apart. I'm not getting enough attention, enough passion.'" "One." Marlo opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Exactly," Fletcher continued. "Instead of talking to me, you found comfort in the arms of other men. You betrayed everything we had." "I didn't want to." Her voice broke. "I never planned to cheat. It just happened. I felt wanted, interesting, the way they looked at me." "And me? How did I look at you?" "You stopped seeing me, Fletcher," Marlo said, and tears began to flow down her cheeks. "You saw a wife, a cook, a housekeeper. Not the woman." Fletcher felt some of his anger give way to something more complicated, a mixture of regret and exhaustion. "Maybe you're right," he admitted quietly. "Maybe I got too caught up in the routine. Maybe I took you for granted, but you chose the worst possible way to deal with it." "I know," Marlo whispered, "but you have no idea what it's like to feel like your best years are passing you by, that you're stuck in a life that brings you no joy." And you have no idea what it's like to find out that the person you trusted completely betrayed you over and over again, Fletcher replied. Every time you said you were running late for work or meeting friends, I had to wonder if you were lying. I don't even know how many lies there were. Marlowe sank to the floor, her shoulders shaking with sobs. What now? Are you leaving me? Fletcher picked up the folder from the table and turned it over in his hands. These are the divorce papers. They're already prepared. All you have to do is sign them. Please don't do this, Marlowe begged. We can fix everything. I'll change. We'll both change. Are you sure you want to fix it? Fletcher asked. Wasn't it you who told Tobias that your marriage was just a convenient stability? That I would never notice even if you danced naked in front of me? Marlowe flinched at her own words. I didn't mean it. I was just angry. I felt forgotten. And instead of talking to me, you went looking for comfort in the arms of strangers. It wasn't just sex, Marlowe said quietly. I was looking for connection, understanding. That's worse, Fletcher replied. Physical infidelity is one thing, but you gave other men what should have been ours alone. Your thoughts, your feelings, your soul. For a few minutes the room was silent, broken only by Marlowe's quiet sobs. Fletcher looked at the woman he had spent 10 years of his life with and tried to reconcile the image of his beloved wife with that of a stranger who shared her most intimate thoughts with Tobias. I've already transferred half of our savings to a separate account, he finally said, and I've packed my things. I'll rent an apartment for a while until we decide what to do with the house. You're leaving? Right now? Marlowe's eyes flashed with genuine fear. What's left for me? Fletcher asked. How can I sleep in the same bed with you, knowing that you've been lying to me all this time, knowing that you were out there with other men? I can explain everything. Give me a chance. Marlowe stepped closer, reaching out her hand. It was just sex, nothing more. You're my husband, the man I want to grow old with. But not the one you want to live with now, is that right? Fletcher's voice was quiet but firm. I was your backup plan. Stability, a home, joint accounts. Passion and excitement were for someone else. No, you don't understand. I just got confused. I made a mistake. Please, Fletcher, don't ruin everything we have. I didn't ruin it, Marlowe. You did. With every it was just sex. With every lie. He stood up and headed for the door. He stopped at the doorway and turned back to her. You know what's ironic? Being with you as Tobias, I learned more about you than I did in the last years of our marriage, because you were finally honest. Too bad that honesty was reserved for a fictional lover instead of your husband. Marlowe sobbed on the floor, her carefully applied makeup smeared across her face. Please, give us another chance, for everything we had. Fletcher looked at her for a long minute. Part of him wanted to stay, to try to fix things, but a stronger part knew that trust, once broken, could never be fully restored. I'll call you in a few days, he said finally. We'll need to discuss practical matters, the house, the bills, everything else. Are you going to file for divorce? Fletcher sighed. I don't know, Marlowe. Honestly, I need time to think, but I can't stay here right now. He turned and walked out, ignoring her pleas to stay. In the garage, he retrieved a hidden bag of belongings and placed it in the trunk of his Jeep. One last look at their home, the place he had considered his refuge, his happiness, and Fletcher drove away, not knowing if he would ever return. He booked a room at the Hillside Motel on the outskirts of Bridgeport. Not the nicest place, but clean enough and, most importantly, far enough away from their mutual acquaintances that he wouldn't run into anyone by accident. Sitting on the edge of the creaky bed, Fletcher stared at the folder with the divorce papers that Marlowe had left behind. Part of him wanted to just sign them and be done with it. Another part remembered the good times, their first meeting at a local bar where she laughed at his stupid jokes, their modest wedding in the city park, The evenings when they just lay there holding each other, dreaming of the future. Could what they had been saved? Or was the trust, once broken, beyond repair? Fletcher didn't know the answer. He only knew that his life, which a month ago had seemed predictable and understandable, was now completely out of control. His phone was ringing off the hook with calls and messages from Marlowe, but Fletcher didn't answer. He needed space, time to make sense of everything that had happened, to decide whether their marriage was worth another chance or if it was better to let go and move on. The future that had once seemed so certain was now a blurry spot of uncertainty. 5 months had passed since the day Fletcher Donovan packed his things and left the home he had shared with Marlowe for so many years. A cool autumn wind blew fallen leaves across the sidewalks of Bridgeport, reminding him of how quickly things change. After that emotional confrontation, Fletcher stayed in a motel for only a week. Thanks to Dave, who heard about his situation and helped him find a small apartment above a sporting goods store in the city center. It wasn't the most luxurious place, but it had a separate entrance, reasonable rent, and most importantly, no memories. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago, sooner than Fletcher had expected. With no children and mutual agreement on the division of property, the process went surprisingly smoothly. Marlowe didn't contest his terms, perhaps out of guilt. She kept the house, paying Fletcher his share, which he invested in a small business. After 10 years working for Dave, Fletcher decided to open his own auto repair shop. It was small, with only 2 lifts, but it was his own. Dave was understanding, even helping him with supplier contacts and giving him some valuable advice. "It's about time you stepped out of the shadows, kid," he said, patting Fletcher on the shoulder on his last day. Now, 2 months later, Donovan Auto Service was slowly gaining momentum. Nothing spectacular, but a steady stream of customers, good reviews, and, most importantly, a sense of independence that Fletcher had been lacking in recent years. He hired a young assistant, Riley, a 22-year-old graduate of a local technical college, an energetic guy with golden hands and a lot of questions that reminded Fletcher of himself when he was younger. His personal life was also gradually improving. In the first few months after his divorce, Fletcher had deliberately avoided any romantic involvement, devoting all his time to work. But nature takes its course, and when the Larsons brought their Chevrolet in for a checkup, he couldn't help but notice the attractive blonde woman who came to pick up the car. "Did you change the timing belt?" "Yes, and we replaced the tensioner," Fletcher replied, surprised by her knowledge. "It was on the verge of breaking. Good thing you noticed," she nodded. "My brother ignored a warning like that once and ended up having to replace half the engine. That's how I struck up a conversation with Jana Larson, a 30-year-old physics teacher at Bridgeport High School and the sister of the car's primary owner. It turned out that she had recently returned to her hometown after 5 years of teaching in Columbus. She was divorced, had no children, and enjoyed hiking and reading science fiction. Their first date happened almost by accident. They bumped into each other at Joe's Cafe, struck up a conversation, and ended up having dinner together. The second date was planned, a trip to the movies to see a new sci-fi blockbuster. By the third date, Fletcher knew for sure that he felt comfortable with this straightforward, intelligent woman who didn't play games and said what she thought. Jana knew about his divorce, but not the details. Fletcher only told her that he and his ex-wife wanted different things out of life. Technically, that was true. That Friday evening, Fletcher closed his workshop a little earlier than usual. He and Jana agreed to have dinner at the Olive Garden, not the most sophisticated but the most decent restaurant in Bridgeport. Taking a shower, changing into a clean shirt and pants, and spraying on the cologne Jana had given him last week was a simple ritual, but one that nevertheless filled him with positive energy. The Olive Garden was packed on Friday night, mostly with couples and groups of friends. Fletcher arrived first and took the reserved table in the corner of the room. He ordered a bottle of red wine that Yana liked and waited, looking over the menu. Fletcher? Fletcher Donovan? A woman's voice made him look up. Standing at the table was Kelly Parker, Marlowe's closest friend since high school. She hadn't changed much over the years. Same short dark hair, bright lipstick, and energetic manner. "Hi, Kelly," Fletcher smiled awkwardly. Since his divorce, he had been careful to avoid mutual acquaintances, especially those who were closer to Marlowe than to him. "I didn't expect to see you here," Kelly said. "Are you alone?" "Waiting for someone," he replied evasively. "Can I sit down for a minute?" Without waiting for an answer, she sat down on a chair opposite him. "I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time." Fletcher nodded, maintaining a polite smile, though he felt tense inside. What could Kelly want from him? According to rumors that had reached him through the grapevine, she had been completely on Marlowe's side after their breakup. "How are you?" she asked, looking intently at him. "Really? Not for the record." "Fine," Fletcher replied. "Working. I opened my own workshop." "Yes, I heard. Congratulations." Kelly paused, twirling a ring on her finger. "Listen, I know I probably don't have the right to ask this, but do you ever think about Marlowe?" Fletcher sighed. Of course he thought about her, especially in the first few weeks after they broke up. Memories, doubts, anger, and pain mixed into a toxic cocktail that poisoned every day. But over time, those feelings dulled, leaving only a slight bitterness that 10 years of his life had ended so meaninglessly. "Sometimes," he finally replied. "What?" Kelly looked embarrassed, which was unusual for her. God, how can I say this? I feel partly to blame for what happened between you two." Fletcher frowned. "What do you mean?" "Marlowe never told you, but most of her escapades started after our bachelorette parties," Kelly said, lowering her eyes. "I always bragged about my flings, talked about how exciting it was, the secret, the risk, the novelty. I think I pushed her down that path." Fletcher looked at Kelly in surprise. He had always known that she had an active personal life, several marriages, numerous affairs, but he had never thought she could have had such an influence on Marlowe. "It's not your fault, Kelly," he finally said. "Marlowe is a grown woman. She made her own decisions." "Maybe," Kelly shrugged, "but I know I kept adding fuel to the fire. When she told me about the first one, well, I didn't discourage her. On the contrary, I encouraged her. Then the second, the third." She fell silent. "And now I look at her and see how unhappy she is." Fletcher felt a strange twinge in his chest. For all these months he had carefully avoided any news about Marlowe. "How is she?" "Honestly, lousy," Kelly sighed. "She's working like a dog. She's lost weight. She hardly ever goes out. When I invite her somewhere, she always has excuses." Fletcher didn't know what to say. Part of him felt satisfied that Marlowe was suffering, a petty, unworthy part of him that he didn't want to admit to. But another part, more mature, felt only sadness that two people who had once loved each other had caused each other so much pain. "Has she tried to contact you?" Kelly asked. "No, not since we finalized the divorce. She wants to, but she's afraid. Afraid you'll send her away, and I can't blame her." "What do you want from me, Kelly?" Fletcher asked bluntly. She sighed deeply. "I don't know. I guess I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for my part in all this, and that, maybe, if you two talked—" "No," Fletcher replied firmly. "It won't work. Too much has been said and done. Some things can't be fixed." Kelly nodded sadly. "I understand, and I respect your decision." "I just thought I should try," she said, standing up. "I'm sorry I bothered you. Have a nice evening." "Kelly," Fletcher called after her as she began to walk away. "Thank you for your honesty." She smiled a sad smile and walked away, disappearing among the other guests. Fletcher sat staring into space when he felt a light touch on his shoulder. Yana was standing next to him in a blue dress he hadn't seen before, her hair pulled back into a simple but elegant style.
"Hi," she smiled, leaning in to kiss him on the cheek. "Sorry I'm late. The meeting with the director ran late." "No problem." Fletcher stood up, helping her sit down. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." Yana looked at the bottle of wine. "Oh, my favorite. You remembered." "Of course." He poured her a glass. "How was your day?" "Crazy. 2 lab workshops in a row, an essay to check, and then that meeting with the dean." She took a sip of wine. "But now I'm here with you and all that chaos is behind the door." Yana noticed his slightly absent gaze. "Something wrong? You seem a little distracted." Fletcher hesitated. Should he tell her about his conversation with Kelly? Or would that just ruin the evening with unnecessary memories of the past? "Just ran into an old acquaintance," he finally said. "A friend of my ex-wife's." "Oh." Yana looked at him intently. "How did that go?" "Strange," Fletcher replied honestly. "She apologized for supposedly pushing Marlowe into cheating." "That's unusual," Yana said cautiously. "How do you feel after that conversation?" That was what Fletcher appreciated about Yana, her directness and genuine interest in his feelings without judgment or jealousy. "To be honest, I don't know," he said, twirling his glass in his hands. "Part of me wants to forget the whole thing like a bad dream. Another part is still trying to understand what went wrong." "That's normal." Yana put her hand on his. "After 10 years of marriage, it's impossible to just turn off all your feelings, even if the end was painful." "Thank you for understanding." Fletcher squeezed her hand. "Honestly, I was afraid this conversation would ruin our evening." "Hey," Yana smiled. "We're adults. We all have a past. What matters is that we're here now and we have a future." Fletcher felt the weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying lift a little. With Yana, everything was simple and honest. No games, no hidden motives, no manipulation. "You know," he said, raising his glass, "let's drink to the present, to what we have right now." "To the present," Yana agreed, clinking glasses with him. "And to people who never look back." They ordered dinner, pasta for her, steak for him, and the conversation smoothly shifted to other topics. Her students who had built a working model of the solar system, a difficult client who insisted that his car sounded wrong, plans for the weekend, maybe a trip to the lake, if the weather permitted. When dessert was served, tiramisu for 2, Fletcher caught himself thinking that he had hardly thought about Kelly and her words in the last 2 hours. Yana told a funny story about how her nephews tried to bake a cake on their own and almost burned down the kitchen, and he laughed sincerely, without a trace of the tension that had been haunting him for months. "Fletcher," Yana said suddenly, after a pause, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Sure," he nodded, already guessing what she wanted to ask. "Do you regret your divorce?" Fletcher didn't rush to answer. It was the same question he had asked himself during the sleepless nights after moving out of the house he shared with Marlowe. "No," he finally replied. "I regret that we got to the point where divorce was the only option. I regret that I didn't notice the problem sooner. But the divorce itself? No, it was the right decision." Yana nodded slowly. "Thanks for being honest. I'm asking because—" She hesitated. "Because we've been seeing each other for almost a month now, and I'm starting to feel something serious. And I want to be sure you're ready to move forward too." Her candor caught Fletcher off guard, but in a good way. After months of deception and half-truths with Marlowe, this transparency was like a breath of fresh air. "I'm starting to feel something serious too," he admitted. "And yes, I'm ready to move forward. With you." Yana's smile lit up her whole face, and Fletcher felt the last remnants of anger and bitterness he had been carrying inside him begin to melt away. Seeing her happy eyes, he realized that life really did go on, that every ending was followed by a new beginning, and that perhaps that beginning was sitting right in front of him.
Later, as they walked through Bridgeport in the evening, holding hands, Fletcher felt a strange sense of completeness. The conversation with Kelly, which had initially thrown him off balance, now seemed like a kind of final chord, closing the chapter of his past life. "What are you thinking about?" Yana asked, noticing his expression. "How strange life is," Fletcher replied. "6 months ago, I thought my life was over, and now I'm walking down the street with a beautiful woman and feeling like it's just beginning." Yana smiled and squeezed his hand tighter. "You know, there's a principle in physics that energy doesn't disappear, it just changes form," she said. "I think it's the same with life. When something ends, that energy doesn't disappear. It just transforms into something new, sometimes even something better." Fletcher looked at her gratefully. After all these months of despair, doubt, and pain, he finally felt at peace. Not absolute happiness. There was still a long way to go, but a calm confidence that everything would be okay. A young couple walked past them holding a little girl by the hand. Fletcher watched them go, but without the usual longing he felt when he saw happy families. Maybe someday he would have a chance to create a family like that, or maybe his happiness would look completely different. In any case, the future no longer frightened him with its uncertainty. They reached Yana's house, a cozy one-story cottage with a small garden on a quiet street. The porch light was on, welcomingly illuminating the path. "Would you like to come in for some coffee?" Yana asked with a smile. "I'd love to," replied Fletcher, and taking her hands they climbed the steps of the porch, opening the door to a new chapter in their lives.
Ma,